The Geopolitics and Empire podcast is joined by Nikola Mikovic, who is a freelance journalist in Serbia covering Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, and political developments in the Balkans. We'll be talking about Belarus, its balancing act between the US, EU, and Russia, President Lukashenko, and the coming elections this weekend, and the allegations of destabilization and interference in Belarus. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Nikola.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Belarus is known as the last dictatorship in Europe. It has been holding an interesting position and balancing act between the East and West for a long time, and perhaps now it's coming closer to having to make a decision between, the West, the European Union, or the Eurasian Union. Lukashenko has seemingly been going along with the Russian Union state integration and the Eurasian project, but then has made 180-degree turns at times. You say a Belarusian U-turn toward the West is unlikely, as it is too dependent on Moscow. How do you see things? Has it come time for Belarus to pick a side, or can it continue to walk the high wire?
Lukashenko will certainly try to continue balancing between Russia and the West, but I don't think it is possible in the long term. The problem is that Moscow is not willing to keep subsidizing Belarusian Soviet-style economy anymore. And Belarusian economy heavily depends on Russian loans and Russian cheap energy. Since the Kremlin now wants to basically integrate Belarus into the union state of Russia and Belarus, which is something that Lukashenko firmly opposes, the situation is going to be a bit difficult for President Lukashenko. On the other hand, he's certainly not welcome in the West because, as you said, Belarus is known as the last European dictatorship, which is actually not the case. He's been in power for 26 years, and we have a guy called Milo Djukanovic in Montenegro, and he's been in power for 30 years. But nobody in the West calls Montenegro the last European dictatorship, but that's a completely different story. Anyway, I don't think it is possible to keep balancing between Russia and the US and the West. In the long term, such a policy is not sustainable anymore. So Lukashenko will definitely have to make some concessions either to the US or to Russia. I think he will eventually choose Russia because he's quite aware that he's simply not welcome in the West.
And I think there's a lot to the geographical aspect. And again, this regional blocks that are forming of EU in North America, South America, Eurasia, and beyond. And it just seems like there's the history and there's too much of Belarus tied into Russia. As you said, Lukashenko has been in power for 26 years. I believe that's 6 terms. The elections this weekend are the first time the polls do not unequivocally support Lukashenko. It seems some people have had enough. Indeed, I have seen the same thing in Kazakhstan, where I live and work, as President Nazarbayev saw the writing on the wall and preemptively decided to step down. But you say that Lukashenko will win a Pyrrhic victory, but that chaos may ensue. What does the future hold for Lukashenko?
So whatever happens on Sunday, the opposition will not recognize the results unless they win, which I don't think will be the case because Lukashenko firmly controls the election process and the election commission. So already on Sunday evening or maybe on Monday morning, Monday afternoon, Belarusian opposition will start mass protests in Minsk and in other major cities. And then Lukashenko will have to react, and it will be a test for his security apparatus, if they're still loyal to him. I think they are because his son Viktor is still in charge. He apparently controls National Security Council. On the other hand, it will be a test for the opposition. They will have to prove if they have the critical mass to start some riots. We will see. It will be a very interesting period. And you mentioned Kazakhstan. Well, yes, Lukashenko apparently wanted to implement a similar model to try to find a successor and to change the constitution. Now, I think the coronavirus and everything that happened had to, due to all that, he had to postpone the constitutional change. If he wins the election and if he stays in power after the election, he will probably change the constitution and prepare the ground for his successor and eventually apply Kazakhstan's model in Belarus. I don't think he will stay in power like Putin, basically until the end of his life. His health condition does not seem to be that good, actually. He said he had a coronavirus. Observers, they say that he also has an issue with blood pressure. His health is not that good, but still he can stay in power for the next 5 years. And I think that will be his last term, no matter what happens.
You mentioned coronavirus, and I mean, you feel free to disagree with me. You may disagree with me, but I must say that one thing I really liked that Lukashenko did was not lock down Belarus, and he reportedly admitted that the IMF and the World Bank were essentially bribing him with loans in order to force him to impose the same curfews, quarantines, and lockdowns that we're witnessing in practically every nation around the world. What are your thoughts on this alternative approach that Lukashenko took? Is there anything behind the scenes related to that?
So Belarus and Sweden were the only two countries in Europe that did not have a lockdown. Belarus did not implement any restrictions, basically. So it's whether that decision was good or not, it was just a demonstration of his sovereignty that Belarus has. So he can make decisions, unlike other European leaders who simply have to follow the instructions they get from the World Health Organization or whatever. And Lukashenko, he chose that path. Whether that's good or not, it's completely different question. But now he was ridiculed and criticized by both Russia and the West for not having a lockdown in Belarus. Many people were not satisfied. But on the other hand, let's imagine he actually locked down the country and implemented all those curfews and everything. Then they would call him again the last European dictator. So whatever he does, there will be some consequences. The coronavirus situation had a strong impact on Belarusian economy, also on Russian economy as well. So that's one of the reasons why Russia is not willing to keep providing cheap loans and cheap energy to Belarus. And Lukashenko is quite aware of that, and now he's trying to find a solution. He's trying to start importing oil and gas from other countries such as Saudi Arabia, the United States, Norway, and so on. But recently, Belarus and Russia, they signed an agreement on oil supplies, which means that Belarus, I think, will stay in Russia's geopolitical orbit. And also Russia is building a nuclear power plant, is providing loans and technology for that power plant in Belarus, which means that the country will definitely stay dependent on Russia, at least when it comes to energy.
Yeah, that was another question I had in previous articles that you have written. It seems that you were saying that Russia had, I think it was in January, had stopped supplying Belarus with oil, and Belarus was looking to Europe and the US for natural gas. So have they done a U-turn on that again? So are they moving back to Russia in terms of energy?
Well, that's not the first time Russia and Belarus, they had plenty of those disputes, energy disputes. But this time, I think this is the first time that Belarus started importing energy from other countries. It was not a U-turn, it was just a threat to show the Kremlin that Belarus has an alternative when it comes to energy. But eventually they signed an agreement, so obviously it's not a real alternative, it's just a temporary solution. So Belarus will continue buying Russian oil and gas. We will see if what will be the price if the Kremlin will be. I don't think actually the Kremlin is willing to keep cheap gas and oil to Belarus, so the price will likely be increased, at least gradually, and that will also have a serious impact on Belarusian economy. So in any case, whoever wins, be it Lukashenko or his rival Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, Russia will have that dispute with Belarus.
Let's talk about the interference. So this talk of destabilization. We know that the U.S. is famous for its color revolution, regime change apparatus. Of course, Russia interferes as well, and so many countries, have stakes in the game. And so recently, 33 Russian mercenaries were apprehended in Belarus. Some say they were part of a destabilization plot. I think I've read that Lukashenko freed them and said they were legitimately on their way to Turkey, but I've also read that Lukashenko said that they had been sent to Belarus with destabilization in mind. There is also this idea that it is some type of a false flag operation by Lukashenko to gain victory points, because it's always good to use the external boogeyman enemy. So in terms of destabilization, regime change in Belarus between Russia and the U.S., what do you see going on there?
Yeah, in the past, Lukashenko blamed the West of trying to destabilize the country and implement, force a regime change. This time he's accusing Russia, although today he accused, not directly, of course, he just said that there was one of those mercenaries apparently had the U.S. citizenship, U.S. passport. So he's playing a game. He's trying to blame everyone, both Russia and the West, of trying to destabilize the country. So it's a good strategy if he wants to mobilize his voters to portray himself as someone who's trying to protect the country against the invasion, be it from the West or from Russia. I think Russia and the U.S. are actually, they're not enemies, they're partners. Now, the problem for Russia is that it is a younger partner since it's lost a Cold War, and they often make deals, and it is quite possible that they already made a deal regarding Belarus. Now, we will see what that deal means and what will be the consequence for the people of Belarus. If the final goal was to overthrow Lukashenko, then I don't know that, I'm just speculating. So if that was the case, then they will probably try to divide the country by setting up their own zones of influence within Belarus. So Russia could control energy, the US or the West could control industry or whatever. We will see. As I said, I'm just speculating, but I think they certainly have a deal, and everything that's happening in Belarus is not happening by accident. There must be a plan, and we will see what the plan is. It is still too early to say that, but in any case, the show in Belarus is about to start already on Sunday or the day after.
And so we've talked about Russia and the U.S., but there's also China. In some of your recent articles, you've mentioned China moving in on Belarus. China deems Belarus the gateway to Europe, as part of its Belt and Road. How do you see the China dynamic?
I think China has a limited influence in Belarus. It built the industrial park near Minsk, and it provided some loans to Belarus, but it is not China. Belarus is not China's sphere of influence, simply because China is too far from Belarus. And it is, as you said, the geography here is a very important factor. So Belarus is still in Russia's geopolitical orbit, and now the question here is if Russia will simply let Belarus go, or if it will keep Belarus as a client state, but will create new conditions. So if Russia decides just to let Belarus go, then we will have another Ukraine on Russia's borders. If not, then I still don't believe that Russia will send its troops to Belarus to invade the country or to annex Belarus. That's not going to happen. Many analysts believe that Russian troops are ready and waiting for chaos to start in Belarus so that they could move in and annex Belarus. I don't think that will happen. I mean, why would they do that? What's the point? Belarus does not have any natural resources, does not have any coal reserves or oil or gas. So it's not like in the Donbass where Russia, let's say, provided the assistance to local rebels, and now Russia de facto controls the coal mines in the Donbass. But in Crimea also Russia controls. There are apparently gas reserves in Crimea, but Belarus does not have anything similar. So it's not that interesting for Russia. It isn't. Russia, I think, wants Belarus as a transit country for gas to Europe, and the West, on the other hand, would like Belarus to liberalize its economy and to allow Western corporations to buy some successful Belarusians enterprises, and Russian oligarchs want the same, obviously. And China is interested in cooperation with Belarus, but as I said, it's not Chinese zone of influence. It has a very limited influence in the country. So I don't see a Chinese presence in Belarus as the most important player. I don't see China as the most important player in Belarus, unfortunately. There are many other countries that are involved. Poland, for example, is a regional power. It's becoming a regional power. And in the post-Lukashenko Belarus, Poland is expected to have a very important place and to play a very important role in Belarus. Just like it has certain influence in Ukraine, although not that strong, but in Belarus it will definitely be involved in the post-Lukashenko Belarus, be it now or in 5 years or whenever, but we should pay attention to Poland.
I think that's a good summary of the situation that you just gave. Are there any other points you'd like to get across or final thoughts to leave us with on the future of Belarus and the new Cold War?
So if there is a new Cold War, it's a new Cold War between China and the US, not between Russia and the US. So I think Russia will try to stay neutral. In Belarus, so as I said, I expect mass protests, and then we will see if Lukashenko is determined to fight until the end, as he said, or if he will eventually give up and maybe leave the country. Now, I'm not sure if he's welcome in Russia, because he managed to spoil the relations between Belarus and Russia. At this point, it looks like he has just one option: to fight until the end. And many people in Belarus are not satisfied with the current situation, but I still think that he's supported by the majority of the population, because he certainly is supported by rural population and the elderly citizens, and also by many other people who work in state-owned companies. Young people, on the other hand, want changes, whatever that means. So it will be a very interesting time. And in case of some riots, we will see if the security apparatus, how will it react. In any case, I don't think Russia will get involved militarily. We discussed the Wagner mercenaries. So now there are speculations that they were sent there to start shooting, like in Maidan in Kiev in 2013 and 14. If that was the plan, then it was very similar to the one that we had in Ukraine. So in that case, there would be mass riots because people would feel that they're in danger because the regime is trying to kill them all and so on. So maybe that was the plan by Russia, maybe not. We don't know. Lukashenko is blaming everyone, basically, both Russia and the West. And we'll just see what will happen after the election. But I think the future for Belarus will be very dark, whoever wins.
It was good to have you on for the first time to give us this take on Belarus, something we haven't talked about on the podcast. Where can people find you and your work online? Where's the best place to see your writing?
Well, they can find me on Twitter, and they can find my writing basically in publications such as Violent Times, Tsarism. Sometimes I write for Chinese media. On Twitter, I would suggest.
Okay, yeah, I would suggest people bookmark you on Twitter. I find Twitter useful. It would be a shame if my Twitter account is deleted, because it's a great resource. And yes, you also write at Geopolitical Monitor, the CGTN, Common Dreams, American Conservative, as you mentioned, Tsarism, and many publications. So thank you, Nikola, for being on Geopolitics and Empire.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this Geopolitics and Empire podcast and interview. I would like to remind you that our website is geopoliticsandempire.com, and you can sign up for our mailing list that goes out each weekend with the latest podcast and a long collection of important news headlines. It's good to sign up for the newsletter in case we experience censorship and deplatforming. You can help the Geopolitics and Empire podcast by subscribing to and interacting with all of our channels such as YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Gab, Minds, and Steemit. You can also help us by leaving a rating and review on your favorite podcast platforms such as iTunes, Castbox, Stitcher, Spreaker, and so on.
Finally, if you value our work and our mission and would like to see us continue interviewing experts from across the political spectrum, please consider leaving a one-time donation via PayPal or Bitcoin, or becoming a regular monthly supporter on our Patreon. All the links can be found on geopoliticsandempire.com. Thanks for listening.